Hey everybody, PJ back with Exotic Car Hacks, and I hope today, first off, you are staying safe. And secondly, we're going to be talking about a very safe investment called the DBS. Ever seen my actual clip on VinWiki where I basically broke down why the DBS has been one of my most profitable flips ever and multiple times, then basically you understand why I have this very close tie to the Aston Martin DBS. But there's much more than that, because the DBS is just such a phenomenal car for several different reasons. First off, I think it's the last great Aston Martin, meaning it's the last of its generation. It was involved in a Bond movie, which adds a lot of collectability. And more importantly, they're getting harder to come by than the new Vanquish, meaning there's less units, there's less clean units, and there's less low mileage unit. And I think that creates a huge opportunity for an investment, much more than a higher production car like the Aston Martin Vanquish, which is basically the same car internally with just a different shell inside out. So should you buy a DBS? And what should you look for if you're going to be purchasing a DBS? So there's a couple of things you need to know before buying a DBS. There's significant differences between 2009, 10, 11, and 12. And while the run in itself was basically 4 years, basically each year represents something very different from a collector / purchase resale standpoint. The first thing you should know is that the most or majority of DBSs sought after are manual 6-speed cars. Now, the majority of people who seek 6-speed cars basically understand that they're limited in production, and most of the time do not actually know that the majority of the 6-speed cars, 500 production units, were basically made in 2009 as an introduction to the market for the DBS. And so the first set of DBS cars were basically all manuals, followed by the manual being an option in 10 and being a much rarer option in 11 and 12. So if you do find a 2011 or 12 with a manual transmission, regardless that it's a coupe or Volante, you will still find that there's a significant price increase in between the 11 and 12 manuals and anything between 9 and 10. You'll also find a huge price hike on the manuals because over the last year, we've seen a huge jump in the cost of what basically manuals are, simply because of less of them being on the market. And so if you looked at the market 4 or 5 years ago, you could easily find a manual 6-speed DBS. If you look on the market now, you'll see basically the same 6 or 7 cars sitting there for the last 2 years with huge numbers basically based on the miles. There's something else you should also pay attention to in a difference between 10 and 11. You see in 2009 and 10, the majority of basically the entire DBS line had plastic in it, meaning that all the buttons for the transmission, the buttons for the sport button, etc., like all the push buttons inside were basically plastic. In 11 and 12, they were basically converted over to glass, which makes it a big, big difference inside. In addition to that, you should know that there were many basically transmission upgrades in 11 and 12 over on the automatic over the 2009 and 10. Now, let's talk about that automatic for a second, because there's a huge misconception about the DBS. Most people think that the DBS is available in E-gear or in manual. They basically say you either have the paddles or you have a manual transmission. It's actually inaccurate. The DBS is only available in automatic or manual, meaning you either have a manual transmission or you basically have a real automatic transmission with a torque converter. So it's basically a ZF transmission that is very, very reliable and does not operate on an SCT or DCT, meaning no clutch is associated with that automatic transmission, which would then make it an E-gear car. So for that reason, while the Vantage in itself holds basically an E-gear based transmission called the Touchtronic 1, 2, and 3, the actual DBS itself does not. It has a full automatic that is extremely reliable. So the automatic DBS in itself is not a bad thing, because we know how clunky the Aston Martin gearboxes are when it comes to their e-gearboxes. That's one of the attractions that really led to a lot of people buying the manual DBS, thinking that the automatic DBS was an e-gear as well in its early stages. And so for that reason, people kind of shy away. So the education portion is also very important to understand that we're basically dealing with a full automatic or a full 6-speed. Now we're also dealing with the fact that we have paddles, which basically has this rev match feature that makes it sound as you're downgrading, that it gives you that over throttle response that basically gives you that feeling that there's a cost. But the reality is that the actual cost of the transmission is very cheap in the sense that it doesn't cost that much to maintain and it's very reliable to drive. So should you buy a DBS now or not? Well, with the current economic climate, the DBS is going to be a much safer investment than the Vanquish, partially because, as I share in all of my videos, the DBS is already depreciated down and hit its time depreciation curve, and soon we'll start riding back up that curve based on supply and demand. Low supply, much lower supply, especially for low mileage cars, bringing higher demand for collector money into this market. So that said, the DBS is an iconic car. It's pretty much trouble-free. It's a transmission and engine that's basically been in play for Aston since the earlier release of the DB9 for quite some time, I think in 2003 or 4. So basically, the car is pretty solid. If you're going to be buying one, I would recommend a couple of things. Here's my latest one, which is basically a 2012, commissioned by Q, highly optioned, with over a 300K sticker, and with a very rare color combination, with a Cuyo interior in pristine shape with only 8,000 miles on the clock. Collector-grade cars like these are getting harder and harder to come by. This is currently the only 2012 that I know of that could be for sale anywhere on the market under 10,000 miles. And if you look on basically AutoTrader, CarGurus, or some of these other places like eBay, you'll basically find that the majority of these cars are now non-existent under 10,000 miles and will pop once in a while. Lower mileage cars will always bring more money, but more importantly, lower mileage cars will often lead to better condition. And condition matters when we're talking about collector markets more so than when we're talking about drivers markets. So when we're talking about buying a Gallardo or R8 that's been driven, we're talking about a buyer that's interested in driving the car, not one that's interested in looking at the car. In the collector market, you basically have to look at a car that's art ready, like showpiece ready, and basically looking at that to have no mechanical failure, up-to-date maintenance, and more importantly, up-to-date condition, meaning it's not going to need repairs that are astronomical in nature. So if you're going to be buying a DBS, there are a couple of things you need to know. The DBS market is right now capped at 100K, meaning you should not be paying $1 over 100K for any DBS of any kind, including manual transmission cars. While you see listings in the 120s, 150, and 160, you'll slowly start seeing that trend back down, which would create incredible opportunity to buy an 09 with under 20,000 miles, under 100K. And that would be a home run, even given the pandemic we're in once we actually exit kind of the situation that we're faced with, right? One of the big things that people have to basically understand about buying cars that are going to be worth more in the future is that timing plays a significant role in it. And while you can buy basically a great deal now, you also will be in a position where you might be forced to unload the car if you're not in a financial position to hold it. And you never want to be in a financial position to dump a car in the middle of a recession or a pandemic. You always want to be in a strong financial position to carry that car onwards. Now, if you're going to be buying a DBS, let me give you some basic tips. First off, try to buy an 09 manual car under 20,000 miles, under 100K. Secondly, if you can't find that and have to get an automatic, try to get a coupe between 11 and 12. Coupes will do significantly better than the Volantes all around, simply because they won't show their age as much with convertible tops being soft. The other thing you need to consider is make sure you private purchase inspect the car and make sure you look for a couple of key things. Control arms and shocks tend to leak after a couple of years, regardless of what. Like the control arms tend to get weak, and basically the leaking happens from the shock. The other thing to also consider is that oil pans typically could go bad, and gaskets start showing sippage after a while. Sippage does not mean replacement, just means you need to be conscious of it, especially as cars sit or have been sitting for a while. The other thing that can get pretty expensive on a DBS if you're not careful is basically pitting of the rotors. Many of the owners of DBSs previously had no idea how to drive these cars, and so basically they ran the brakes to the ground, and you'll have a significant heavy squeaking coming from the brakes at all times. If the squeak comes as soon as you hit the brake pedal, then basically what you're doing is realizing you're going to need to replace your rotors. If the squealing comes after long driving, after wet conditions, or comes in once in a while, basically that tells you that the ceramic brake rotor is actually not damaged by any means, but rather just is something that just has a reaction to basically weather condition, which is 100% okay. And there is some squealing to be expected from a ceramic rotor, just not squealing like a bus at the first impact, no matter what the impact is or how hard it is. So things that you should basically consider prior to making a purchase. The other thing I would recommend is looking for colors that are such as white, black, or silver There's multiple layers of silver and all of them are fantastic. One of the most collectible cars you can buy on the market today, if you can find one in pristine condition, I found one that was in horrible condition, I passed, is basically a Casino Royale 2009 or 10 6-speed manual. And if you can find that, basically you can literally park that and watch the money go up in the time being. Now, if you want to ever learn how to invest in exotic cars or why some exotic cars are assets while the rest are liability and depreciating, basically click the link under this video and this will give you full access to my free training on basically how to hack your way into exotic cars instead of buy or lease them. This will basically teach you why leasing is a scam, how exotic cars can be bought for as little as $300 a month, and more importantly, more than anything else, basically teaching you the difference between the right car and just a liability. So if you want to learn more, click the link below and learn. The training's completely free. Otherwise, guys, subscribe, like the video, and I'll catch you on the next video for exotic car hacks. Be safe out there. Take care.